One of the advantages of double stud walls is that you can frame with 2x4s. This makes the wall easier to lift, but these jokers are still using a big old forklift to do the heavy work. Millennials. Most studs come pre-cut, but the third floor of this house is a little shorter than 8 feet, so Ben gang cuts a handful of studs together. He lines up the ends with a framing square, clamps the bundle together, and marks a line. While he's doing that, he explains the order of the walls to be framed in the house. Usually eaves, then gables, because the shorter gable walls can be framed and stood between the longer eave walls. As for those eave walls,
so we pick which walls we want to frame here based off of where we can reach from. So we have a low side to the building, and I had some concern about whether or not we were going to be able to lift that wall with the lull that we have. So I did this wall first in case we had to come from the higher grade side of the building. I'd still have a way to be able to reach up and grab the wall and lift it.
after he cuts the studs, he stacks them next to the plates and explains his layout process. It's designed to save steps and reduce dependency on memory.
As far as layout goes, in pre-construction I go through the prints and I make myself a cheat sheet, so to speak, of the location of all of my window ROs and sizes. So that when I get here, we can just pull on our plates and lay out our ROs accurately. And I always set it up pulling from the right towards the left of the building, because that way I can mark out my ROs. By the time I get to the end of the wall plate, I can unhook from my ROs and start my layout, because I usually run my sheathing starting left to right. So I just try and think it's a way to, cut movement on the job site. One trip down, marking my ROs, and then I can just pick right up there and work my way back, doing all of my layout for sheathing.
The third trip down the line is marking the hieroglyphics. In this case, Hawk uses a framing square to mark both sides of the studs, but sometimes he gets risky and uses a speed square marking only one side. Plate stock comes longer than the nominal length it's sold at, so it needs to be cut to the correct length so that it will split on a stud on layout. As long as we're talking about plates, it's a good practice to break the top plates over studs, because if you've ever run an expensive new hole saw into a mass of nails, well, we'll just leave it there. So with the plates laid out and the studs roughly stacked, they can begin framing. They pre-built the rough openings earlier while Ben was talking to the camera, and so now they can just plop them into place and roll. Let's take a closer look at that window framing. Ben pulls his tape from left to right, marking centers of window openings. To lay out the window opening, use the center line to mark the width. This will be the inner face of the two jack studs or trimmer studs. The inner edges are the rough opening and the outer edges are the header width. The jack studs sit under the header, holding it up at each end. Beginning with the header, let's look at the assembly sequence. The header usually has a plate above and below to give full bearing on the jack studs. The height of the jack studs depends on a number of things. It could be aligned with the tops of interior doors, or it may be specified in the plans. Either way, flush the bottom of a jack stud with the bottom of a king stud and nail them together. Now you can nail the header into these beam pockets. You can also piece in the outer cripple studs and sill plate, but Ben holds off on cripples that are within the opening just yet. Those are added along with the cripple studs above the header as the wall is framed. Back on the actual job, Brian checks the crown on each stud and places them in the same direction to avoid a humpy wall. Meanwhile, Liz fills in the cripple studs below the sill. These follow the typical layout so that wall sheathing will break right. While the bottom plate is nailed, the top plate is slid into place and nailed as well. Now Liz fills in above the header. When the wall is framed, they square it up. The bottom plate is tacked on the line in the floor, and they measure diagonals to see which way to whack the top.
3/8 out.
Right to left in this case. They recheck it, and when it's perfect, they snap a line for the first course of sheathing, which takes us to the end of framing. Next time, we'll put the sheathing on the line and nail it.